I don't think I've ever come across an enigma like David Cage. He's a good developer, he's a bad developer, he's an okay developer, he's the worst developer ever, he's an alright developer. All that comes in and out of conversations at sporadic intervals. He is possibly the strangest creator alive in terms of reception. All his games have received polarizing reactions from fans and critics alike, he's won awards based on his writing, yet he's often criticised for his narrative. It's gotten to a point that a discussion about him or his games becomes infuriating because you can find both good and bad aspects, with barely any middle ground. David Cage bothers me more than possibly any other developer on the planet. He bothers me more than Neil Druckmann, more than Peter Molyneux, more than Randy goddamn Pitchford, because whilst it's easy to summarise those previous figures easily, Druckmann for disconnected gameplay, Molyneux for the constant cycle of failed promises, and Randy for doubling down on lies, David Cage is both easy and hard to describe. He is an enigma. With David Cage's next game, Detroit Become Human, likely coming out sometime next year, I thought it would be best to try and understand why David Cage and his games bother me in a describable way. I'm going to do this by showing why Heavy Rain isn't a good game, though arguably still his best. Heavy Rain was released early 2010 to very positive reception. It was a killer app for the PlayStation 3, became a benchmark for graphics technology, and is currently the 14th best-selling game on the system. 10th if you only consider exclusives. Though they originally garnered attention with the ambitious but still flat Fahrenheit, or Indigo Prophecy, Quantic Dream cemented themselves as a developer to keep an eye on in the modern hemisphere. David Cage became an industry icon, and the audience reception was very positive. It's a game that commonly appears on best of lists, ranging from best of the year, best of system, and sometimes best of all time. It's currently rated 87 on Metacritic with 73 near-perfect scores, has an audience score of 7.7, and was included in the 1001 Games You Must Play Before You Die book, released the same year as the game's release. When reading the reviews, you can see common praise in certain areas. It's visually spectacular, your decisions actually matter, the QTE input is an improvement from Fahrenheit, which isn't saying much considering what you're working with, and the story is genuinely intriguing, from the unique characters to the overarching plot. I find the latter point really problematic for reasons I will get into soon, but I'm willing to admit that I do agree with some of the same points a lot of these reviewers bring up. Visuals, gameplay improvements, mostly technical achievements, and the reason why I don't really have a problem with them is that it's easy to sum up its objective qualities. It's a game that has mechanically aged well, or to put it in context, the game released 7 years ago, and picking up the controller and replaying it for the first time in 5 years wasn't as jarring as it should be. Though, admittedly, the camera controls are still awful and the visuals have certainly dated, but the game did set the benchmark for realistic presentation in video games at the time. So if I have a lot of positive thoughts about the game, why do I believe it's not very good and undeserving of these scores? Or to put it simply, why don't I like Heavy Rain? And the answer is actually very simple. David Cage. I know it's kind of a cop-out, pointing fingers to one person. Games are made by several teams separated into specific responsibilities, and if something doesn't work, then it's that team's fault. For instance, the story of Mankind Divided and some specific gameplay features are questionable at best and baffling at worst, but I don't point all the blame on Jean-Francois Dugas, Mary DeMarle, or Olivier Prol. The reason why is because even though Dugas was the creative lead of Mankind Divided, his direct involvement was likely in looking at design ideas, tweak them to be in line with the overall creative vision, shutting down bad ones, and signing off on those that do work. The role is obviously more complex than what I described. I'm not someone to presume exactly what someone's job role requires them to do, but the point still stands. The mistakes in Mankind Divided can't be solely levelled on the director. The problems Heavy Rain, and by extension Beyond Two Souls have, can interestingly be confidently levelled at David Cage. And only David Cage, because his approach to creating games is by using a different medium as a reference. Trying to make your game filmic is something more easily said than done, something Ready at Dawn can attest to. The gameplay is there solely for the story, not for the sake of mechanics. On the positive side, the gameplay is well presented and the colour scheme makes it easy to get more absorbed into the story, but on the negative side, when the story does fall flat, and it often does, it has nothing to support itself upon. In order to really explain why this narrative doesn't work clearly, I'm going to dissect the story in 5 chunks. Throughout the game you switch between 4 main characters, and this makes trying to explain the story in chronological order confusing. So instead I'm going to start with Ethan's story, then Jaden's, then Scott's, then Madison's, before looking at the finale. So let's start this dissection with Ethan Mars, arguably the main protagonist. When we are introduced to Ethan Mars, he is just an architect with a happy family who is preparing for his older son Jason's birthday. He takes showers, puts on clothes, looks at birds that suddenly die minutes later, and also lives in an extremely nice house with a great back garden in addition to being a stay-at-home architect, so naturally he's the man we have to connect with. Other characters in his family include his wife, Grace, who you'll probably forget when the game gets started proper, Jason, the world's most annoying kid as you'll soon see, and Sean, the only family member who really matters in the bigger picture. He takes his wife and 2 sons to a mall, where after purchasing a balloon for Jason for $2, no, seriously, it's $2, loses his oldest son in the crowd. After some searching, he finds his son outside and on the other side of a 4-lane road. After seeing his father, Jason does the exact opposite of what 10-year-old kids are taught, and just runs across the street without looking either direction. Ethan, realising a distant car is coming towards the boy, yet doesn't pay attention to the one that nearly hits him, tries to stop him and save his life. Despite taking the brunt of the car's force, Jason dies anyway, leaving the viewer more frustrated at child characters, and leaving drivers questioning how aware this driver was when heading towards the kid with the bright red balloon. What speed was this woman going at when she hit this kid and Ethan? You know that hitting someone at 30 miles an hour gives the receiver an 80% chance of living, and with Ethan taking the brunt of the force, shouldn't the chances of surviving increase? Actually, if the force was so strong that it left Ethan in a 6-month coma, what did the kid die of? Why is this confusing? According to David Cage, the root cause of this confusion was actually a request on Sony's end. The original cut would have had Jason flying through the air and roll on the ground, before cueing his mother's scream seen in the final cut. Sony was understandably iffy on the idea of a child getting brutalized by a car, and Cage had it changed to what we see today. So why can't we have Ethan take the brunt of the force and go over the car, while Jason also takes the brunt, but goes down off camera? A smashed window screen would have added more impact to the collision, and would have had the response of, yeah, he's dead, instead of, wait, he's dead? What a pathetic death for a useless, irritating character. It's bad enough that the kid wanders off and somehow managed to cross this road when his parents weren't looking, but combined with the gameplay forcing you down a series of events and refusing to let you off the beaten path, it's essentially trying to get you invested in this plight. You can't diverge off the path to the balloon. Ethan calls out to Jason and that causes him to turn around and run across the street. Even if you don't want him to, the game will not let you progress in your way. It might not have been so bad if one of the game's marketing hooks wasn't about choice, and if the chapter was actually well executed in its writing and directing. Take a look at Sean. He should be concerned that his older brother just died in front of him, but instead of looking shocked or upset, he just looks bored. Yeah, my brother got run over and died. Yeah, whatever. The game fast forwards 2 years. Ethan is alive, but he and his wife have separated. He experiences blackouts and has developed a fear of crowds. His son is distant and now goes to a shrink in order to treat his grief. One of these blackouts occurs after putting your son to sleep, waking up in the middle of the road and holding an origami figure. While this can present an interesting mystery, it should be noted that Ethan suffers only one other blackout afterwards. It is mentioned maybe 1 or 2 more times before no longer becoming a factor in the story. Once again, the explanation for why these were dropped was due to cut content. Originally, the game was going to have supernatural elements in the form of a spiritual bond between Ethan Mars and Scott Shelby due to the car accident. The blackouts would lead into these swimming sections where Ethan would explore Scott's memories, which would include the Origami Killer's victims. This cut content left behind scars in the story, such as the blackouts, the origami figures that appear in Ethan's hand when he comes to, and a confusing section near the beginning when Ethan reads a newspaper.
I've seen that face before.
Anyways, Ethan heads to a park with his son where he takes part in several activities of your choosing. You can ride the swings, seesaw, and teach Sean how to throw a boomerang. During this chapter, you'll likely experience the cognitive dissonance between you and the characters. The chapter is poorly thought out in general, partially due to Sean switching between empty husk and loving son at the drop of a hat, but mainly due to the existence of this carousel. Every single activity in the park is based on player choice. You chose to ride the swing. You chose to teach Sean how to throw a boomerang. You chose to spin him around and around and around. You get my point. But when you are given the option to leave, Sean asks you to let him ride the carousel. Without a shred of player input, Ethan agrees and encourages him to get on while you go get a ticket. You're the adult. Choices are one of the game's primary selling points. Why can't you tell Sean no? Leaving the park with him before a blackout could plant the possibility that Ethan is the origami killer in the player's head, but instead, David Cage wants the player to play the game his way. In the interest of fairness, I replayed the chapter to try and see if you can leave the park in any other way, but no. You buy the ticket, and you watch Sean ride the carousel before blacking out. He wakes up to find his son missing. Nowhere to be found. Ethan goes to the police, but it's clear that Lieutenant Carter Blake is not only dismissive, but pretty much the archetypical asshole cop for reasons we will see later. I understand that the police might not want to automatically link the disappearance to the origami killer, but considering another young boy was just discovered, in addition to the weather being consistent with the killings, you'd think that they would take the case much more seriously. Regardless of choices, you have a brief argument with Grace Mars before she blames Ethan for Jason's death. She must have forgotten that he jumped in front of a car to try and save him right in front of her, and spent 6 months in a coma as a result. But we're just backtracking now. Somehow the reporters get word that Sean is missing, and somehow manage to find Ethan's home and camp outside of it. I presume the police may give the press a daily briefing of current events, and yeah, I can buy that, but isn't it illegal to literally camp outside of someone's home in order to get a story? Isn't this harassment? Granted, I don't know the boundaries of reporting, but now I ask how the press somehow managed to get Ethan's address only 12 hours after his initial questioning was finished. I doubt police press briefings give out second-party addresses, and Mars isn't exactly an uncommon last name. Ethan starts questioning if he is the origami killer, and that comes completely out of left field, with only the more recent blackout and origami figures to reinforce the idea that he could be the killer, as it's only until much later that we learn that he's been having visions of people drowning and origami figures appearing for some time.
I'm the origami killer. I black out, and then the murdering starts. I know it's me.
If this had been shown, this moment would be understandable, but without a natural build-up, it feels like the concept appeared completely out of nowhere. Regardless of the small existential crisis of possibly being a killer, Ethan gets a letter containing a locker key. With no other option presented to both Ethan and the player, you leave the house and go see what's inside the locker. Arriving at the station, Ethan's fear of crowds starts to get the better of him, which leads into an interesting, if inconsequential scene. It's interesting in concept, since it could give us a better insight into how Ethan copes with his fear of crowds, but the appearance of Jason completely ruins the tone of this section. 1, Ethan's response to pretty much go after the hallucination doesn't make much sense, since Ethan already accepted Jason is dead and knows what he is seeing isn't real. It also reminds the player how annoying Jason was, and the appearance of the character doesn't add additional insight into either Ethan or Jason. If Jason was taken out, nothing would change in the bigger picture, and Ethan would go to the lockers anyway. He finds a shoebox before the scene fades to black. Ethan checks into a motel, opens the shoebox, and discovers that it contains origami figures, a cell phone, and a pistol, completely disregarding the metal detector and the security guard that's right next to the entrance of the locker area. The cell phone starts playing either a live feed or a pre-recorded video of Sean in a drain, before a message appears asking Ethan how far he is prepared to go to save his son. Through this, we learn that the origami killer is a bargain basement jigsaw killer. The origami figures are numbered, each with a different question that follows the "Are you prepared to do this to save your son?" format, followed by an address. The first address is a car lot, containing a vehicle to be used in Ethan's first test. The car has been there for 2 years, but I'm not bothered by the man out front not recognising Ethan as not the owner of the car. If you've worked in the same place for 2 years and have dealt with at least 20 clients at a time, it would be easy to forget faces, but I refuse to accept that the car has been locked up for 2 years. Considering other people have voluntarily followed Ethan's path before, it's amazing that Ethan is the first person to take this particular trial. The man out front kept the car in good condition by taking it for drives every month, while also servicing it. So what would happen if he put the GPS device on the handle and activated it? Granted, it's explained later that electronic devices linked to the killer can go cold, but having a battery power system stay still for 2 years risks the battery leaking and ruining it. It's a small nitpick, but when you complete the game, the whole 2-year storage aspect doesn't make sense, especially since the origami killer is able to purchase stolen cars. How much more sense would it make to park the car in a location symbolic to either the killer or Ethan, and have the note direct him there? The car could be at the house you lived in at the start of the game. It's another example of David Cage's inability to write a cohesive story. So Ethan is instructed to drive to a flyover overlooking a motorway, where he is told to drive on the wrong side of the road for 5 miles. Never mind the fact that the sequence itself is cartoonish in its execution, but the section demonstrated Cage's stubborn direction in the story. In every other trial, you can refuse in one way or the other, but in this trial, and to some degree in the next trial, there is no way you can refuse to attempt it. The option is there, but it's a trap. You have to do it in the end regardless. It's to make sure that the character injures himself to some capacity. In the next trial, you can only walk away after injuring yourself crawling through glass. So why do you have to go through this pain? So you can get healed up by Madison Page, who is by far the most unnecessary character in the entire game, yet is the only character to have their own Wikipedia page. I am not kidding. So completing these trials awards you with a short clip of Sean, in addition to some letters and a hangman that presumably leads you to the boy. It's a neat way to motivate Ethan to partake in more trials, though one does question how much the origami killer planned. Like, regardless of what happens, the car crashes, but what if the locked glove box that contained the hangman pieces broke open, and Ethan essentially cheated by accident? Of course, we know why that wouldn't happen. It's because no matter what happens, David Cage wants the story told his way. The first encounter with Madison is brief and has her work on his wounds before he takes a shower. They talk, Ethan can act coherently, and Madison leaves. Ethan's contribution to the scene is fine, though Madison's inclusion is problematic for reasons I'll get into later. Ethan then opens the second origami figure that directs him to a disused power plant. Now, I'm not an expert in power plant decommissioning since I wasn't very good at science and, you know, I don't work in a power plant, but I am confident that government measures would ensure that the facility is completely cut off from the grid by removing the possibility that the power could be turned back on and make even the courtyard inaccessible by boarding up the surrounding area. Considering that not only the generators are turned on, but are emitting unsafe forks of electricity from presumably unstable condensers? Yeah, you would assume that the unsafe conditions would be acted upon. Ethan isn't even the first person to enter this facility, so it's surprising that not one person would report on the active station. It's been on for at least a few days. Someone would notice. So providing that you're able to climb through the condenser wires, Ethan is once again granted more letters in the hangman. If he fails and is electrocuted several times, he just leaves, completely disregarding the set of wires he already climbed through like it's nothing. Either way, he leaves, and upon his return to the motel, collapses. though we don't actually see it, but Madison arrives to help treat his wounds. Several hours pass if you successfully apply the treatment, before Madison once again leaves. Ethan picks up the third origami figure and sets off to his next test. Now, for all the crap I gave the previous two tests, this is the one that demonstrates the qualities of Quantic Dream when not under the heavy direction of David Cage. Ethan is told that he has to cut off a portion of his finger in front of the camera within 5 minutes, and even after knowing what is coming, it still makes me uncomfortable. Didn't help that my tool of choice was a pair of pliers, and that Pascal Langdale gave a terrific performance when Ethan experiences the pain. My only major concern for the chapter is in regards to the location and the key to enter, but those are concerns that only come in when analysing for this video. It's not something that instantly stands out, like the 2-year car lockup or the day's active power station. Ironically, when the test goes small scale in its design, it ends up arguably being an iconic chapter in gaming history. So Ethan completes the test, gets more letters to the hangman, and leaves the room. Except he cannot leave the building because of his delirious state, and that Madison once again shows up. She tells him that the police are outside, including Norman Jayden and Lieutenant Blake, and that they are prepared to arrest him. This section is fine on its own, and I did like the reincorporation of Ethan's fear of crowds, but the one thing that gets me is the police officer who aims their gun on you. There's a possibility I am wrong about this, but why doesn't the police officer fire a warning shot towards Madison and Ethan? I understand that warning shots are a legal grey area due to the possibility that the bullet might hit something, or someone, but the environment allows the officer to safely fire a warning shot. So why am I asking this? Because if Ethan doesn't cut off a section of his finger, the officer actually fires a shot that either hits Ethan's shoulder or the finger that was destined to be cut off. It is entirely dependent on your success in the previous tests, and I have to stress that the butterfly effect doesn't work that way! So if Ethan and Madison escape, they make it back to the motel room, where they learn that Ethan is the prime suspect in the origami killer case, thanks to the police looking into Ethan's estranged wife's suspicions. Madison is also a little suspicious, since every time she encounters Ethan, he's in a state of pain. Although one wonders why she is more than happy to continue helping him, even though he is likely the most wanted man in the country right now. Ethan even agrees with this, and tells Madison to leave and let him do what he has to do. The next thing he has to do is outright kill a guy with the gun that was in the shoebox. Of course, this is a rip-off Jigsaw, so the man is a drug dealer who at first mistakes Ethan as a drug addict. After an action sequence in which Ethan avoids getting shot by a shotgun, the two men come to the end of the fight in the daughter's room. Ethan holds the gun to the dealer's head, giving the player the choice to not kill him for the sake of his daughter. Yeah, no, that card isn't going to work on me, because I simply don't care about this character. David Cage's child characters exist to add artificial gravity to the situation, rather than be characters that contribute to the overall plot. It's funny that the child characters in his most famous works act more as anchors to both the player and the character, and sometimes it's downright offensive. What do these children, these daughters, contribute to the overall plot? That Ethan is on the fence about possibly denying a man an opportunity to see his kids again? Like his current situation? Maybe if the drug dealer was likable in some way and not the classic bad guy with a heart of gold, and maybe executed in the same way as The Walking Dead Season 1, then it might have worked. Yeah, remember Lee Everett? He killed a guy for sleeping with his wife. This incident is using children as a quick, lazy way to get the audience to connect with someone we've barely seen a minute of. The daughters exist to try and get us to feel sorry for this drug dealer. It doesn't work here, because not only are these girls not giving me a reason to care about them or their father, but also every single child in Heavy Rain is either irritating or has the worst voice actor assigned to them, thus making us expect the worst when a brief sight of a child appears. Oh yeah, minor tangent, Sean's voice acting is bad. Even in child acting standards, it's bad. Listen to this. This is Sean's reaction to encountering the possibility of drowning, death, the one thing his brother experienced only 2 years ago.
Help! Dad!
Sean.
Where are you? I'm so cold. Dad! Dad!
There's no crying in desperation, no tears as the possibility of being killed in one of the slowest, most painful ways possible, and the direction David Cage gave him can be accurately summed up as act as if you're bored. You couldn't find worse voice acting even if you tried. At least the voice acting in Silent Hill had a purpose, and Mind Jack is almost adorably bad in its execution.
I don't know what has happened. It is smoke began. The whole of it exploded.
Anyway, back to the motel, and Madison arrives to see Ethan distraught over the death of a drug dealer, or lamenting the fact that he didn't shoot him. One wonders why he didn't fire at the guy on his doorstep, but we'd be backtracking. Madison tells a shaken Ethan that she knows he isn't the origami killer. Despite the fact that the guy's son is drowning in a well somewhere, Madison leans in to kiss. You're given the choice to either reciprocate it and encounter one of the most laughable sex scenes in all of gaming, or reject her advances, and I can tell you, I could not hit that rejection button fast enough. Mainly because the romance is ham-fisted and crowbarred in. Sex and romance don't make a game mature, and Ethan's collective time with Madison equals maybe 25 minutes at best, during which he has been checked up on, twice, stalked, and watched while he slept for 3 hours. If you go through with the sex scene, you learn that Madison is really a photojournalist who somehow found where the electrocution trial was taking place, without an address or any information to go on. She apologizes, and you can either reject or accept it. This leads into another case of the butterfly effect not being incorporated correctly, because if it was, then the police would have burst through the door while the two were having their moment. The event is determined through game sequencing, not through clever and careful writing. A similar example would be Mass Effect 3's introduction, where the Normandy arriving is dependent on your ammo counter, and not on the amount of time you fought off your enemies. Regardless of what direction you take in arguably the worst romance in video game history, Ethan makes a valiant attempt to escape Lieutenant Blake, and ends up on the motel roof. He jumps off and hijacks a taxi, making his way to his 5th and final trial. Isn't it strange that the roads around the motel weren't cordoned off and a taxi was somehow able to casually nearly run over the person the police were trying to apprehend? Not trying to continuously repeat myself, but Ethan is a wanted serial child murderer, and a highly publicised one at that. How can an operation like this be handled in such a sloppy manner? There's incompetent police, then there's David Cage not asking basic questions about his script.
Holy fuck!
The last trial, and David Cage brings his artistic genius to the table. By which I mean the scene looks like a European artistic film that was unable to properly portray the symbolism. So basically a Lars von Trier film. The corridors and the White Room I can sort of get, since the final trial portrays the successful transition from someone distant from their son to going to great lengths to get to his son. A transition that falls flat when you consider that Ethan was having a good time with Sean and was repairing his relationship successfully immediately before the kidnapping. So tell me, viewer, what do the cameras pointing to Ethan represent? I'm being serious. Is it to show Ethan the person he has become, or is this another example of technology opening itself to pretension? If anything, the layout of the room with the cameras and the screens is nothing but over-designing something. Get rid of the cameras and screens, then you'd have something I believe would be more effective. After all, the best trial in the game was small scale, and didn't need anything too complex to be effective. So the trial is that you have to drink the poison to get the letters, and doing so will give you exactly 60 minutes to say goodbye to Sean. The origami killer must be one smart man because the effectiveness of poison is different from person to person. You can have him down the drink or leave to find Sean. If you fail to complete one trial out of the 5, you get into the vehicle, where you have to track down the kid using the letters obtained during the trials, and the footage of your son drowning. The big giveaway is a foghorn from a boat that's likely loud enough to blow the captain's ears out. It's not even subtle. Wouldn't it be better to use the faint sound of seagulls as the giveaway clue? Okay, maybe it's not that subtle, but it's a more realistic clue than a ferry horn that's that loud. And so we reach the end of Ethan's story. He sets off to whatever location you choose in the hopes you picked the right address, but before we get to that confrontation, we need to go through the other stories first, starting with Norman Jayden.